Asgrow Google Hangouts. I'm Ken Anderson, Brownfield anchor reporter based in Lincoln, Nebraska. Today we're going to focus on the state of Iowa as we visit with Jim McDermott, who is a DEKALB Asgrow technical agronomist based in Spencer, and with Sue Bracan, who is a DEKALB Asgrow technical agronomist based in Winterset. And want to welcome both of you here. Sue, let's start with you to kick off our discussion here. I'd like to hear a little more about your background and your current role as a technical agronomist.
Well, I'm actually from Southern Iowa. I got a chance to move back home. I'm from the Winterset area, grew up on a farm here, went to college at Iowa State with agronomy and horticulture degree, and graduated in '97. So spent the last 20 years in the industry in seed production and corn, and then also with an equipment company, traveling in the last 10 with Monsanto, launching products and working with our dealers in the field.
All right. And Jim, how about you?
Well, sure. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, I'm based in Spencer, Iowa. Been with Monsanto and DEKALB for about 21 and a half years. Prior to that, was in the retail organization in Northwest Iowa, and also spent some time in consulting out in South Central Nebraska. But graduated from Iowa State in 1987. So also kind of back home, back in Iowa, and then definitely glad to be here.
Well, let's talk about this past growing season, the 2016 growing season, and talk about the growing conditions that you experienced in each of your territories, and also about how the DEKALB and Asgrow products performed. Sue, we'll start with you.
Overall, we had a very, very good year in the fields. I'm in the south central part of Iowa, where we split the terrain of really nice, high expectation on yield ground down to the places where we roll across the acres. We had high yields on beans and very high yields on corn. A very consistent rainfall helped feed that in a lot of cases, where we probably pulled a lot of nutrients from the soil and they were exposed that we normally don't get when we get extreme dry or extreme wet periods of time. The eastern part of my territory, which would be over the Pella Knoxville area, some of them had a drier June, which created some different pieces for the growing season. But overall, we pulled off some really fantastic yields on both corn and beans.
Jim, how about you?
Yeah, for Northwest Iowa, we really got off to a rough start, especially the western side of the state. Very wet planting conditions, very cool planting conditions, especially in the last couple weeks in April. Eventually, most everything got planted. Actually, quite a few replants this year. As a matter of fact, the most replant acres that I've seen in my career in agriculture. So widespread replanting for some of the wet, cool conditions. And then after that, we turned around and were fairly hot and dry in June, which usually you put those two things together, Ken, and you have a recipe for disaster. But I guess despite that, our July, August, even September were really almost ideal. We had good moisture, long growing season. We were able to finish our crop well into September. So really, like Sue, we ended up with fantastic yields. Corn was very good. Soybeans, a lot of people would say it was their best soybean year ever. So really across the board, we were just outstanding for yields, especially considering the start that we had.
Sue, you mentioned pulling the nutrients out of the soil, and we've had a couple big crop years in a row here, and I've heard that that's something that farmers really need to be thinking about going into this next year, is the depletion of nutrients.
Our big yields do pull more nutrients out of the soil to grow that crop and produce the stalk to hold the crop on, or the ear or the pods on the beans. Overall, I think making sure we put the money back into inputs and fertilizing correctly for the season we're going into for our realistic yield expectations is where we need to be. We did have, for the most part, fairly consistent rainfall after a cold, wet spell in the spring, like Jim mentioned. But I think we got a better use of our nitrogen in the soil that's already there, and also some of the other nutrients we normally couldn't lock up if it gets really dry. The plant doesn't have access.
Jim, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as far as nitrogen, we talk nitrogen utilization. Having that late moisture helped because we were able to pull in the nitrogen with the moisture late season. And I think we had very good mineralization this year with the above normal temperatures that allowed some of that organic matter to break down into nitrogen. So we were able to utilize that. And I think what we're finding too, some of these fantastic yields on corn, 230, 250, even 280, we're able to do it on really not necessarily the high nitrogen rates, especially if we're able to split apply or if we're able to use that nitrogen efficiently. And if we've got a good root system, we can raise some amazing corn yields on really what would be considered average nitrogen rates. And then in the other part of that, as far as the P and K, that certainly is a key point. And I know economics are tough right now, but we've had some high removal rates. And this would be several years in a row. We've had some good corn yields. Producers really do need to be paying attention to that drawdown of P and K as far as the removal. Some areas we've got some ethanol plants, and we've had some residue removal or stover removal with that. So certainly something to keep in mind as far as what we're taking off that field, and to make sure that we're replacing it and allowing that crop the next year to utilize the nutrients.
So let's talk about the upcoming planting season then. And Sue, if you would give us an overview of the DEKALB disease shield products that are being introduced in Iowa this year.
We actually launched, I'm going to call it 3 families for the central part of, or the state of Iowa. We have 109 day, it's DEKALB 5950. We have 114 day, which is DEKALB 6434 and 6435. One is a Smart Stacks, one is a Double Pro, and we also have 667475, also a Smart Stacks and Double Pro option. A couple of things behind that. The disease shield piece gives us, it's basically a selective breeding. So we're pulling products that are stronger in anthracnose stalk rot. They're strong scores in Goss's wilt, northern corn leaf blight, southern rust, and gray leaf spot, which we can control some with fungicide, but if you need to actually have that in the plant up front, you may not need quite as much management behind, or can already protect your yield with the hybrid you've chosen. So we have those products that we're selling out in the marketplace and have sold to go in the ground this spring. Performance was spectacular in the fields, especially on the 6434 family. We had a very good results out of that. It's a 114 day with extremely good stalks and extremely good health to the plant. It had a fantastic or absolutely phenomenal yield results out in the field across the acre. The other 2 also did. We play them in smaller volumes at this point in time as we're launching all 3 product families. And we pushed that 116 day as we're starting in the southern portion of Iowa, but we're not real large on that maturity in this area yet.
What about in test plots? What did you see with the DEKALB disease shield last year?
In test plots, it was very impressive to drive by if you where you started the plot at harvest or as you were checking things out to take notes on it. Very green. I love the stay green at harvest because that also means a combine can typically follow through that without having issues to run the product through. So stay green, excellent stocks, root systems held in there very, very well. I would not, on these 3 products, I would actually make sure and check the ears and the kernels for moisture as opposed to waiting to see that the plants dried down, because from a windshield view or walking up to the field, it's going to look like it's very wet, but you can still have dry grain in that husk, which is a great thing for stay green to run through a combine at harvest. Yield wise, we had anywhere from 10 to 12 bushels better on those products, and even higher than that, depending on the particular location in the state we had those products trialed at. We had some excellent results based against our current lineup and some competitive brands in the field.
Jim, let's talk about Roundup Ready to Extend soybeans in 2017. Now, Monsanto's dicamba formulation, Extend-A-Max with Vapor Grip technology, has received EPA and state regulatory approval. So what can you tell us about the lineup of Asgrow brand Roundup Ready to Extend soybeans that are available in Iowa?
Yeah, it has been very exciting, especially to be involved with this launch, something that's been a long time coming. Been doing a lot of the research really over the last decade. So quite a few of these varieties have been in the breeding pipeline for a number of years. But now this year, as you mentioned, we've got the approval, especially the export approval. We had gotten the Chinese approval and the European approval. So the varieties were approved really during the during the summer. And then, as you mentioned, getting the XtendiMax with Vapor Grip technology approved late fall here open things up for this coming growing season. So we'll have about 21 varieties in the state of Iowa available. So pretty wide scale availability as far as maturity, and really product wise, they performed very well. We were able to get them in a number of test plots, and of course in our breeding plots as well. And performance was very solid. I guess not only yield wise, but when we look at new products, we want to make sure that they're going to fit agronomically, that they have the disease tolerance, especially diseases like SDS and Phytophthora. And good share of these Xtend varieties were able to fit in very well agronomically with what we needed in our lineup.
So talk about some of the big weed challenges that are facing farmers there right now.
Well, sure. And common water hemp is probably top of mind. That one is very widespread and, of course, has been found resistant to multiple herbicide families, including glyphosate, but also ALS, even some of the PPO families. So quite a few of the herbicides we're using currently, water hemp has developed resistance to. Palmer amaranth, of course, has been in the news, and I believe at last count it was up to about 49 counties in the state of Iowa that it's been identified in. So still one of those weeds that's known to be a major problem. I'd say for Iowa, it's not yet widespread in the row crops, but something that we're going to have to be aware of. And probably the other big weed that it seems like the last few years it's been becoming more of a problem has been mare's tail. Obviously, a more of an issue in our no-till acres, but mare's tail has developed resistance to multiple herbicide families as well, and that one has really continued to be a thorn in the side for a lot of the areas of the state, especially the western part and the southern part of Iowa.
I know there's some requirements now for proper applications of the new herbicide. So can you talk about what some of those guidelines are?
Yeah, you bet. The label, I would say up front here, Ken, is changing. The EPA did grant a label with the XtendiMax with Vapor Grip technology back in November. But that label will continue to change, especially during the spring here and even up into the time we're going to be applying the herbicide. So I would remind growers to make sure they stay tuned, be talking to your retailer. But there are going to be some guidelines, and I would say most of them come under the common sense guideline. We really just want to be good stewards. If we've got winds blowing, especially higher than 10 miles an hour, we're going to want to be cautious if we've got non-Xtend soybeans downwind from that field. Some of the other guidelines will be trying to target weeds that are less than 4 inches tall, spraying up through the R1 growth stage, making sure that we've got approved nozzles, using 10 to 15 gallons per acre as far as our spray carrier, and again making sure that we're watching the wind. Another thing that growers may or may not be aware of is with this XtendiMax with Vapor Grip technology, we don't want to use AMS in the tank. That actually will work against the product as far as creating volatilization. And so that's something that has been used commonly with Roundup and a lot of other herbicides so far. And so we do want to make sure growers are aware that that's something that we don't want to have in the tank. And another point along those lines is that we're at the stage in the label where there aren't any tank mix products on the label as of yet. But we certainly anticipate that will change, Ken, again, especially as we go over here the next couple, 3 months before we get into the spray season. So there are going to be some definite guidelines to make sure we steward the product. But again, I think a lot of them come under the idea of the common sense that we should be using anyway with most of our herbicides.
Very good. Well, before we wrap things up here, I wanted to ask each of you if you'd give us some of your thoughts, recommendations for farmers as they prepare for this next planting season now. And Sue, we'll start with you.
I guess a couple things to think about, finalize your seed purchases, know which products you're going to put in what field, understand your drainage base, know what diseases you're looking at. Is it an SDS concern for sudden death in soybeans? Is it an anthracnose score on corn? What are you looking at, and what's the history of the field you're placed it on, so you get the ultimate yield opportunity in those fields? Talk to your dealer on fungicide possibilities. Where would you benefit most? Or you can't outguess the weather pattern, but what other pieces can you put into management that can help you ultimately gain yield and dollars on your operation? The best thing you can do is select varieties and hybrids that are appropriate for the acre you're going on to. And I think the best thing you can do, discuss with your dealer. They have contacts with us or out in the field, and understand what you're putting where. We also have a new tool online. It's within the Ag Seed Select, which is a product site we have. It's a population tool that can help you fine tune how high of populations you want or should need to go on your corn hybrids when you go out into, or products when you go into the field. So that's a good opportunity to fine tune things right before you go into planting season.
Jim, how about you? What can you share with us looking ahead here?
Yeah, and maybe one thing would be just even looking back at this last year. I think we learned that we can have a pretty tough looking crop, Ken, and it can still yield very well, especially if that crop was managed throughout the year. So it's hopefully a lesson learned is don't give up on the crop. I think that was a big key from last year. Obviously, with the economics, we do have to watch every input dollar, and the population would be a key one, as Sue mentioned. We have specific recommendations by corn hybrid, and there's some opportunities to maximize yield as well as saving some money if we're willing to manage these hybrids separately and change those population rates as we go. I think we've got some great hybrids, actually, with really good ear flex. And I think that's something that has changed a little bit. I think as an industry, we had moved towards very fixed ear hybrids. We didn't have a lot of ear flex, and now we're seeing some change in that. We're seeing more hybrids with ear flex. So growers can take advantage of that and lower some of that population down, and really they're able to watch their cost, and in some cases that helps out on the standability. So it's something to keep in mind as they're going into this growing season, is to pay close attention to the tools that are out there to help them manage those population rates.
Well, it won't be long before we're headed back to the fields. Time flies, and 6 weeks or so, a couple months, we could be headed that way. So really appreciate your time and your insight on these various topics. Jim McDermott, who is a DEKALB Asgrow technical agronomist based in Spencer, Iowa, and Sue Brakehane, who is a technical agronomist with DEKALB Asgrow in Winterset, Iowa. And if you'd like more information on these topics, you can contact, of course, your DEKALB Asgrow dealer, or visit dekalb.com or asgrow.com. Thanks again for joining us, Jim and Sue, and I'll sign off. This is Ken Anderson with Brownfield.